One of the biggest decisions that you can probably make as a new grad or intern is if you want to go down the software engineering path or the product management path. Now, this is really more of a new age question because you didn't really hear of any new grad product managers getting hired, but recently I think that there's a much greater trend and much greater desire for younger product managers to enter the field and get their feet wet. If you clicked on this video, then chances are you're likely either interested in one of these fields or making the decision between these two. There are also definitely other career paths out there besides software engineering and product management related to tech, so don't feel like you have to get funneled into one of these paths either. First, I'll start out with what's common between them before then breaking out into software engineering and then product management. So what's common between both of these two paths? Well, obviously both of them are in tech, and it would be greatly beneficial on your behalf if you're interested in these fields to have a technical or computer science background. When you have a technical background, that basically will help you pass the first step of the resume screening of, did you major in CS or do you have some sort of background in computer science that would make you a good fit for this role potentially? Now, obviously that's not all of it, and you still would have to prove your technical coding skills or your product sense skills, but that is a huge step in the right direction for a lot of screenings. Both will also have very structured career paths regardless of where you end up. If you're working at a startup or working at an enterprise established company, you'll have an established path for you for where to take your career. When you start your career, you usually start out as an IC or individual contributor, which means that you're kind of just working on your own thing, isolated, and once you get that thing done, then you're all good. When you start moving up the corporate ladder, you start to earn different titles, and with new titles comes new responsibilities. Although every company will have a different name, for example, Microsoft levels from L59 to L80, and other companies like Google or Apple level from L3 to L8 or something like that. You grow in seniority, you become a software engineer to a senior software engineer or a principal software engineer, for example, and the amount of tasks, scope, and responsibility you have greatly increases compared to when you were a new hire at the company. The same is true for product managers. You grow from being just a regular product manager, or PM for short, to being a PM2, senior PM, principal PM, etc. Now, in both of these paths, you can choose to stay as an individual contributor, which means that you just don't really want to go into management. It's really up to you and where you want to take your career, so just do some thinking there on if you want to stay in IC, or if you want to go into people management, or if you want to just become really good at one specific area and become a technical fellow or distinguished fellow. If you're worried by money or motivated by money, then money is no shortage in the tech field, especially when you're working as a software engineer or product manager. Your skills are always going to be in need, and if you're really good at what you do, then every company will want to hire you in theory. You will probably be compensated handsomely once you land a role, so no fear about compensation in either one of these career paths. The last thing though in both of these paths is that you'll have to advocate for your own career. No one's going to hand you your career on a silver platter and say, hey, here's a ladder, jump on board. Most people will be pretty available to help and give you advice and guidance, but the fate of your career is still in your hands. You have to make the decisions, you have to do the work, and you have to show up for yourself. That's not going to change regardless of what career you're in, so just kind of be prepared to know what you want, and even if you don't, at least work towards that as a goal. Alright, so let's talk software engineering. Software engineering is made up of a lot more than just knowing how to code, and this can often be missed by a lot of people who may be newer to the field, like architecture, design patterns, code hygiene, understanding the agile methodology, and the way that generally a team works, and as with any career, just being a good communicator. So as you can see, it's kind of hard to be good at software engineering straight out of college because there are a lot of skills that you just haven't really practiced that they don't teach you in college. Of course, you can be good at programming, but there are a lot of other team-specific or company-specific things that come into play, such as code hygiene and code standards that you can't really just learn when you're in college. However, if you want to go into software engineering, then the skills of technical interviews, coding, debugging, these are all very practicable and learnable skills regardless of where you're coming from. You'll often hear that you can always learn the skills on the job, but what you can't teach are soft skills like communication, working in a team, and a good attitude/growth mindset. I believe this is true, and this is also why there's not really just one language you can learn to be the greatest software engineer in the world, because popular languages are always going to be in and out, and what's popular now might not be popular in the future, and tech is just a rapidly changing landscape, and no one really knows where the industry will be in 10 or 20 or 30 years. So the best thing that I'd recommend is being technology agnostic. Don't worry about learning the hottest language necessarily, but more so focus on knowing how to write good code, how to go through the debugging process, and how to sufficiently ask for help. As a TA in college, I found that a lot of students just didn't know how to ask for help properly, and they wasted a lot of their time and my time just by asking the wrong questions or asking questions that didn't help get to where they needed to go. Overall, software engineering is characterized by a typically heads-down kind of approach, but you can have a lot of different approaches to software engineering, such as customer interaction, working across teams, engaging in different customer meetings, etc., that you may not traditionally think of when you just hear software engineer. The exact workflow is going to be pretty structured by what your team already has in place, so I won't go into the specifics of what a day-to-day might look like, but I've heard around the grapevine that even for a lot of engineers, you're not spending 8 hours a day just strictly coding. At best, you're spending maybe 4 hours out of the day, and the other 4 hours are spent in meetings, doing reviews for other people's code, etc. I would rewire expectations if you think that software engineering is just sitting down and coding for 8 hours, because it definitely isn't. Let's shift gears over into product management and what that's all about. For product management, I think one of the key skills here is to take the time to build your network of people that you know within your team and your company, and building trust within your engineers and also fellow PMs that you'll be working with. PM does not stand for people management, it stands for either project, program, or product management, and all of these three things can be wrapped into the same job with the same title, and every PM will probably be doing a very different thing from the next PM over. So while you may be working with engineers as a large part of your job as a product manager, you are definitely not in charge of them, nor are you their manager. They have their own lead, their own engineering manager, and managers, so don't worry about actually managing them as people. It's more so focused around the work and making sure that everyone is working efficiently together, and you can help unblock people if needed. As a product manager, you also often have to craft your own way of working. I mentioned that for software engineering, you probably have a pretty traditional workflow that is ingrained within your team or a company sort of thing. You may be assigned as a product manager multiple features or projects to drive, and each of these projects can involve vastly different ideas. For example, one of your projects could be engineering related, so you have to work with an engineering team, but then again, one of your other projects could just be entirely non-technical, and you could just be writing documentation. In these instances, you're going to have a very different workflow and a very different process for getting through each of these projects than the other. So experiment and ask around with the other PMs of what their workflow looks like, and if you can adopt that into something that actually is modified for you. As a PM, you'll likely be spending a lot of time doing tasks that may not be the most interesting, just because of how broad your role can be. Like I mentioned, you can be assigned any task that falls under project, product, or program management, so kind of be prepared and keep your ears and eyes out for any opportunities that may be interesting to you. I found that as a PM, you can really put yourself into a good position just by seeing if anyone else needs help and jumping on any projects that have an open spot for you that is something you're interested in. Of course, you don't want to just go G.I. Joe or go rogue on your manager and your team, so definitely run this by them before signing yourself up. However, it can be really handy to help build your network, work with people that you've never worked with before, and gain skills in an area that your team might not necessarily be working on. For interviewing, you want to have a general idea of the products that the company supports, as well as what you like, dislike, or see as a general industry trend for their products. This is definitely a skill that you can build, and it's called product sense specifically, so if you want more resources, then I would just Google product sense and see what comes up there. I'll break down quickly the kind of qualities that I decided between and why I ultimately became a PM. The first thing is I didn't pass my software engineering interview, which was a pretty big barrier to entry. The second thing is that I appreciated the PM role more. My internship last summer had me working with a lot of PMs, and I really just enjoyed their energy, their enthusiasm, and I guess you could say that I kind of got biased by just working with a great group of PMs. However, what I noticed though is that PMs are usually pretty flexible in terms of what they do, and there are a lot of different opportunities that get involved on projects like I mentioned earlier. And as someone who likes to take on a lot of different projects and be working on different things all the time, I really appreciated this quality about PMs. 3 is that just my natural skills kind of align more with product management. I thought that I was more extroverted, I really enjoyed networking and talking to people, and I really had empathy for a lot of what customers experienced. Not for any particular reason, but just because I enjoyed getting to hear from them and learning about what their experiences were like using a product or feature that may have been relevant or even life-changing for them. When I'm working, what really excites me is doing things that impact other people, which is why YouTube has been something that I've been really excited to move forward with. I feel like I'm helping people by giving them advice and sharing this out as a resource for many different audiences to see in the future. 4 is that in addition to not passing the interview, I just really wasn't the best coder in the room. I often got in feedback that even though I communicated really well and that I had the design idea down, just the implementation of an actual problem into code was where I really struggled. I also got feedback that I would be good in the PM role, so as luck has it, I took the path of least resistance and ended up as a PM here. If you're making your own decision here are some questions to help guide you. 1. Do you find yourself enjoying the actual process of implementing a solution into code, or do you just enjoy the process of finding a solution and designing that solution? Do you enjoy having uninterrupted focus time, or are you good with context switching and kind of moving things around depending on what comes up? Do you enjoy being focused on a singular task and figuring everything about that, or do you enjoy being spread about on different projects and having a little bit of everything on your plate? Lastly, do you enjoy getting into the nitty-gritty details and technical aspects of something, or do you like having the same depth but just a more landscape view of what's going on across that industry? If you lean more towards the first half, then I would probably say you're software engineering focused, and if you lean more towards the second half, then you're probably product manager focused. But again, I can't really make these decisions for you, and there's something that you'll kind of have to come to terms with. If it helps, it's always easier to switch from software engineering into product management than it is the other way around, just because your technical skills will quickly atrophy if you don't code frequently, and being an engineer with 5 years of experience is going to be much more valuable as a PM than being a PM of 5 years experience as a software engineer. Please leave in the comments down below any other questions you may have about product management or software engineering and what each of these disciplines entail. I love to answer them and make your decision as easy as possible. As always, thank you all so much for watching, and I'll see you again next week for a new video. Bye.